So I'm curious too, if for anyone who knows a kid, a child, a young adult even, if you know of a family who has ever had a child who had a drinking issue or a drug issue, maybe in a younger age, or maybe you knew it growing up, one of your friends growing up or something like that. No confession time here, but I'm just curious of how has it affected your relationship? So maybe show of hands, anybody who's ever had somebody in that, you've known of a kid, of someone else's kid, grew up with somebody who was young, maybe one of your people your mom told you not to hang out with. Who would have seen people like that in your world? So about 2/3 or so, maybe at least half of us, yeah. All right, so tonight we'll make sure we cover that. I have some PowerPoint slides for you. I sent them to Andrew, so if you're interested, if you'll reach out to Andrew, he'll just give you a little PDF of this information and some extra stuff that we probably wouldn't have time to cover anyway, so you'll have that information. So as we start out, one of the things that I think is really important for us in starting the sentence, how do I talk to my kids about fill in the blank? We need some ground rules. What do you think the number one thing for you would be for you to be able to talk to your children about anything? Trust. Okay? And for trust to be there, you have to have that relationship. And when does that relationship really start? It starts at birth. It starts before birth, actually. I mean, science is getting pretty smart about finding out how people become people, how we develop our personalities, why some children seem to be resilient, some do not. There's no fast, hard, general formula for that. But it's interesting that trust develops and begins in the womb. It develops with mom.
Sorry, I just thought of a question.
Yes.
How do genetics play into this factor also?
Good question. How do genetics play in? And they do play in. They do play into this. So I want to give you just a little background to let you think about how do we get to the place where an addictive behavior is what we choose as a human being. Why is that so prevalent? It seems like everybody struggles with something. Sometimes we get rewarded for our behaviors. I never did drugs or alcohol, sex, and all that kind of stuff, but man, was I a workaholic? Absolutely. I think school was an addiction for me. I could go to school and I could get rewarded by making an A or doing well in an assignment. And if I couldn't get any recognition from my parents or my peers, I could turn that paper and that worksheet in. I could get a dopamine feeling that comes out in my system. And I learned that at a young age. I learned to perform for grades. And it's interesting, a little confession. When I got to I didn't ever intend to go get a doctorate. It just happened. I told my mom one day I just wasn't smart enough to know when you need to stop going to school. I just kept going. But I did this research and got this work all done. It's a lot of work, and got to the end, defended this proposal in April, right around my birthday. And for some reason, I just couldn't turn it in. I kept finding everything in the world to do except for turn that thing in. My wife kept saying, why don't you just do this? You're about to run out of time. And literally, you only have just so many weeks. It's up in August, and I haven't turned. All I had to do was just literally edit a few words and send it to the binder. I woke up in a sweat one night and was crying when I woke up. My wife said, you okay? And I said, no, I'm not, but I know what's wrong. Things that happen to a therapist, right? I said, I just realized somehow I just kind of discovered that when I turn this in, there's no more school. Which should be a good thing. And it was. Kept saying, I'm done with this. I don't want to do this ever again. But there was something in my system that knew that when you can't perform anymore, there's going to be no more dopamine coming out. What are you going to do then? It's like a drunk that has no alcohol, or a heroin user without a fix. I was having the physical symptoms of addiction, sweating, stressing. It was just shocking to me that's where my brain was. My body was used to performing. So even though I fussed about it the whole time, I was kind of addicted to the process. Hopefully I'm in recovery. I'm not going back to school anymore like that. Still learning, but not going back to school. So let's talk about how does this work. So I'm going to I'm going to share this with you. You'll already know this stuff. You just might not know it in this way. So I'm just repackaging things that you already know. I hope you can see this among the more artistic writing on the board. I'm not as artistic. I can only do circles and lines. But I want you to imagine for a second that these circles represent balloons, and that each balloon it's made out of the same material. And so you blow these 4 balloons up, you lay them out, sort of like a baseball diamond here, just for argument's sake. But instead of tying each balloon off, I hook each balloon to the others with this little hollow straw, like a tube. It's real stretchy. So if you stretch them apart, the air won't be restricted. It'll flow freely between all of them. So I'm going to show you. You already know the laws of balloons, right? So if I squeeze this balloon here, what happens to the others? They get bigger. If I squeeze 2 of them, the others get really big. Now, if I stretch one out, what happens to the others? It gets smaller. Why? Because it's a closed system. The air's got to go somewhere. Did you know people work like this? People work like this. This balloon represents a person's thinking. This one on the other side represents a person's feeling. And they're usually opposite, right? If you're super cognitive like Dr. Spock or Mr. Spock on Star Trek, how emotionally available are you? 0. And if you're off the chart like panicky, drama, how logical are you? 0. So they kind of work like a seesaw. When the air is all up in here, there's probably not as much in here. Does that make sense? So you already know this, that there's a relationship. This balloon represents our behavior. And you notice all these can affect every other balloon. It can flow freely between every other system. And this one, I'm going to call it perspective for now. And perspective is how I see God, self, and others. And if people don't want to talk about God, then I'll just put in here whatever's unknown, or stuff like the past, the future. Are you going to pass that test next week? All that kind of stuff. Stuff you can't see underground. It's perspective. It's how I view that. So it's more than what I think, but this is my perspective of God, self, and others. So over here on the side, I'm going to show you this is how we get there. When a little baby is conceived in the mother's womb, they don't have a whole lot of this yet going on. There's not a lot of thinking. The brain's not there yet. The brain's going to develop as it grows as a basis of these 2 right here. First thing babies feel is pressure and cold, and they start moving in the womb. They kick and they poke, right, ladies? They punch. You feed them tacos, they may not like that. They try to punch it out. So these 2 balloons start small, and they start developing. So a human being begins with when I say feeling, I don't mean emotions. I literally mean feeling with your senses. They turn into emotions later when we add the thinking to it. So all of a sudden, baby does a certain move, and mama turns, and it makes the baby feel something it doesn't like, and so a little thinking balloon starts to form. That's bad, or that's, who knows about the timeline on this, but this is just generally how our system kind of develops. And then the very last thing, according to attachment theory scientists, is the perspective balloon is the last thing that develops. So all these really feed this. And this is, God made us this way in the beginning. And what did God say about this system? What did he say about us as human beings in the very beginning? It's good. In fact, it's very good. So this is not a bad system. Understand that. God says this is the way we are, and that's not bad. In fact, that's very good. We're in his image in some way. So now this little balloon right here, the perspective balloon, the baby thinks everything is part of the baby system. I don't know if we can interview babies and get anything out of them like that, but they kind of think, babies don't know the difference between mom and me. They just think it's all me. And then they figure out one day, I can't control this other person here, so there must be a me and a her. So babies learn first about me, and then there's a you, and the very last thing that a human being gets a concept of is the concept of God. Does that sound right to y'all? Even though God makes them and forms us in the womb, we don't know it yet. We don't realize it. We can't comprehend it. Even the first fully grown human beings could not comprehend that. They didn't get it. So God is last. That's what I call our old nature, our old man, our old way of being. So in the work that I do, I try to help people understand that I can help you get all that back in line. So if your dog gets run over, I hope nobody's dog has gotten run over, and I'm not triggering you for this, but it's happened to me one time. My dog got run over, and I got really sad. So where do you think all the air was in my system? Which balloon had all the air in it? Feelings, right? It's like sadness. So if this feeling balloon got a lot bigger, what had to happen to some of the other three? They had to get smaller. So what does a person who has a depression or a big feeling, a big anxiety feeling, what do they want to do? Nothing. They want to sit, pull the shades, eat ice cream, just a very narrow, lock myself in my room, don't talk to anybody. What do they think? Does their cognitive ability expand? Or does it go, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me? So does it make sense that if somebody comes to me and says, hey, doc, I'm depressed, I can't get out of bed in the morning, I don't think this ever will be any better, what's wrong with me? If I were to say, and I wouldn't, there's nothing wrong with you. You're doing exactly what your system's designed to do. That's a shock absorber. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You're sad. You're sad. So counseling is all about, those are out of whack. Let's get those balloons back in line. Let's get this better. So you don't mess with the big one. First rule of balloons is don't mess with the big one. You work with the little ones. You create a space. So if I get a person to just go outside and walk around the block and go back to bed, you know what will happen? They've just increased their behavior. What's got to happen to one of these three? It's got to go down. So you already know this. You know how this works, but you might not have thought. This is the way people kind of work. But then there's this conversation that God has in John chapter 4 with Nicodemus. And Nicodemus comes to him and says, hey, I know you come from God, and tell me the secret. And what does Jesus tell him? Remember that? John chapter 4? The secret is being born again. Start this process over. This process is not helping you. You need to be born again. And he goes, how do you do that? And Jesus says, well, if you're not born again, you won't see the kingdom of heaven. If you're not born of the water and spirit, you won't even be able to get out there. So imagine going to a baby in a mother's womb, and you could somehow put a stethoscope on there, and you could talk to the baby, and the baby would understand you. And you could say this, you're alive already, right? Baby's alive. Been born once already. You're alive, but not yet. The place where you are, you're not made for it. It was made for you. But it's not where you're supposed to be. There's a great, big, wonderful world out here with music and fun and friends and ice cream and all the wonderful things, which kid can't come, they don't know what that is. But unless you do two things, you're not even going to be able to see that. What two things does a baby have to do to be born? They got to break their mom's water, and they have to take a breath. So I don't know if that's what Jesus meant, but to me it helps me understand. That makes perfectly good sense to me. To be born again means water is baptism and the breath is the spirit. Like there's this parallel example that as humans, I can understand that. For a baby that doesn't do those two things, would you want to be the mama that carries that baby? No, you can't. That baby won't live. It's not made for that environment forever. It's a temporary holding place. Baby's alive already, but not yet. So that's kind of the foundation of changing. So what God does in a new creature process, what I help people, especially working with addictions work, is learning that what was the first balloon that a human being learns, or the first one or two? Do you remember? It's like quiz time, pop quiz time. Feeling and behaving. Do you know what people with addictive behaviors and tendencies do? They feel something they don't want to feel, and they go do something to get rid of it. Why do they do that? Because that's the way they're used to doing the system. Their system's kind of made to do that. They couldn't help it when they started. It was a good system back then when they were itty bitty, but now that's not a good system anymore. That doesn't fit anymore. So helping people understand you didn't have control back then, but you have control now because you have two important additions. Since you've been growing, your perspective of God's self and others, or the unknown self and others, and your ability to think. You have those two things, unless there's physical damage, right? Empowering people to take back their choice, or empowering people to recognize they have a choice, is one of our first goals as a parent. So when do you do this? And this is the big question for me. I want to ask y'all, like, tell me what this is. And some kids, like our daughter, Susan, she's not here. Hi, Susan. She weaned us off and told us when she was ready to take control of areas in her life. When she was like 3 years old, 3 years old, she just said, got up one night off the couch and said, grabbed her blanket, I'm going to bed. Went and put herself to bed, and did it every night since then. The youngest one, I'll leave Joe Michael out because I know he's tech savvy. He'll hack this video and find out. But Stephen won't find out. You couldn't put Stephen into bed. You had to rock him and do whatever. Who knows? He wanted to sneak out and watch movies. That didn't work for him. Your kids like that, sort of. One's one way, some are another way. Maybe you were more of a self-starter. Maybe your brother or sister was more of, let's push the limits. All that's based on past genetics, experiences during birth. Who knows what? I think God gives us some of that stuff in there to use it later in some way. I don't have the answer for that. But I know this, empowering children and knowing your own children, you'll know them better than anybody else will. Don't trust someone else's advice about when do I do this or that. You will know. You know these kids. You are the expert. They mean more to you than they do to anybody else. So don't let anybody rob you of that by a book or a presentation or a therapy session. Not that we can't provide good information, but it's really important if you don't take anything else away from tonight. I think that's a really big takeaway, is that children are on the process, once they're born, they're on the process of leaving you. It begins at birth, literally. You're not as close to them as you used to be, Mom, right? You're now a distance. The longer you hang on to that in general and refuse to let it go for whatever reason, the more challenging it becomes for them to pick it up. It's sort of like a relay race where you run 4x4 relays. There's this stretch of track where the other runner starts getting up to speed and runs alongside, and you only have a certain spot, or you get a foul and you lose the whole race or something, right? Or if you drop it, you lose the race. And so you have this task to be able to run side by side for a short distance. And you hope that if you're the one that's just sprinting your guts out, that your partner is going to grab that and take it away from you because you're tired of running with it. And you hope that if you're chasing, you're fast enough to catch it and you don't drop it. That's what's happening with parents and children at a really big gap. And it happens between, I would say it happens between 7 years old and 35. And it might be higher than that. Right? And it's getting bigger all the time. That gap's gotten bigger. And in the old days, on the farming days, you were getting married at 12 years old. You were working the farm at 6. That window was much shorter. My hunch is that, I don't have data on this, but my hunch is there probably wasn't as much room for addictive type substances to take hold like they do today because of the leisure time and because of the stretching of that cultural growing up time. So it's kind of think about, how do I talk to my kids? What age do I talk to them about it? I don't think there's an age that's too young to start the conversation. In fact, I think we start the conversation at birth. Here, for example, I remember my dad we would go to eat pizza. We didn't go to church when I was growing up. I was a heathen kid. I think I'm mostly out of it now. But we would go to the Pizza Villa down there in Lebanon. It's where one of the realty places is, Hobbs Realty or something is in Lebanon. And it's pretty much once a month. And my dad would get a beer in a big mug. And I would look at that and I would go, what is that? And I would always ask, can I try that? No, you can't have that. Why? You're not old enough. What do you think I was thinking while that conversation was going on? What about, and I haven't even told you about the relationship yet, except for he's taking me out for beer and pizza on Friday night. That tells you something right there. Anybody have a parent like that? They drank or smoked or whatever, and they just, you're not old enough for that yet. What's that? What message might a person get? A kid get?
Some may think, I did not grow up going to church, so at some point, you may think, being that kid, oh, my parent is cool because they do these things, but looking back, I'm like, my dad was, he was a rough one, because he was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Drank a lot, and so, I mean, I, look back now, and all I can think of is, I need to make sure that I'm not that parent.
Okay, so kind of phrase it so you can hear it on tape. So if one message we may get from that is, oh, my parents are kind of cool. They do this stuff. They can drink. They have liquor in the cabinets, or they smoke cigars, or my grandpa smokes a pipe. I might get the message that's kind of cool, because I like the way they have this confidence, and they look pretty brave, and it's scary to me, and it's something you want to do when you're older. But then, as we get wiser and we get experiences and find out that maybe the consequences, we'll talk a little bit about that, about some of the things the behaviors of smoking, drinking, things like that, sometimes it doesn't work out so well. We start thinking, I don't want to be that for my kids. Now, this is just a caution kind of a thing, but if I had a cat statue about this tall, man, out of porcelain, and I loved it so much that I wanted to make another one, what I'd probably have to do is make a mold. And the mold will be the exact opposite of the cat statue, right? If I want to make a picture, I do a negative. I do the exact opposite. And then I do a transmission process and I pour something back in that mold and it creates the cat again. So you know what happens with addiction behaviors? They often skip generations. It's quite prevalent for me to see folks who had parents who were maybe alcoholic, and then I'm never going to drink. I will never drink. And then my kid will turn out to be an alcoholic. It's in Scripture. It's in Ezekiel 18 or 19. I always get this mixed up. God says to them, he goes, y'all are saying this proverb. I don't want to hear it anymore. Our parents ate sour grapes and our teeth are bad because of that. He goes, there's this good dad who has a son who's horrible. Am I going to make that dad pay for his son's horrible actions? He says, no. Everybody stands on their own. And then horrible son has a kid, and the kid turns out to be a great kid. He's like grandpa. Does that bad dad get credit on the checklist and for doing good? Nope. Everybody stands on their own. That's God's perspective according to the Old Testament. We stand on our own. So as parents, if we can understand we stand on our own, our kids stand on their own, we start treating them that way. We start treating them as if we're responsible to them versus for them. Now, we are legally responsible for them, for sure, until they get to some age. We're behaviorally responsible for them until they get to probably some age, maybe before that. So we have to kind of take the consequences. But if we start handing the baton as early as they're ready to receive it, they get used to handling it and used to running with it, and they can make their mistakes while they're under your care versus running off to college and dying from binge drinking or partying with their friends when they didn't have that knowledge. I'm not saying we should teach our kids to drink. I'm just saying they're going to want to do these things because it looks cool in the media. It looks cool to their friends. They're getting pressure from it. So the conversation starts at birth by how we live. How do we treat things that are maybe would be fun, but we can't do them because we're followers of Christ. But there's some little part of us that, well, if we weren't, we would do that. If we just shut that up and don't talk about it, don't tell it, it's going to eke out somehow. So having real, authentic conversations with our kids, they can read you like a book. Think about it. Could you read your parents like a book? And you kind of know what your mom or dad were thinking sometime or when they were not being truthful. There's a book called Alone Together by Sherry Turkle. And she's really one of the inventors of the internet. She was in that group that really did put the internet together. And she writes this book about how technology is the worst thing that she's ever been involved with. She tells a story about a mom with a BlackBerry back then sitting in the SUV at the junior high school, waiting to pick up her daughter, and she's doing emails, being productive. And the daughter had just had a most horrible day at school because something, life-ending thing happened with the boyfriend or something traumatic to an 8th grader. And the girl gets in the car, and the mom never breaks a sweat, never breaks eye contact. She just looks at her phone. How you doing, sweetie? Have a good day? And the girl noticed that she's not paying attention. She says, yeah, it was good. Oh, great. You want to go do such and such? And she just slumps in the back seat. The kid could read mom's, I'm not interested in you message. Mom's checking on Kia because that's what you're supposed to do. All right, I'm checking on my kid. But she's multitasking. She's there, but she's not there. That conversation right there will shape every other conversation that mom has about sex or drugs or alcohol or school or dress or how clean your room is. How do you think it's going to shape that conversation? Will it be a positive shaping, or do you think it'll be a disconnecting shaping? Yeah. So as we think about our kids, no matter what age they are, let's think about how are we engaging with them? Are we fully present when we're with them? For every moment we find ourselves in, strive to be fully there. And then if we're successful at that, let's strive to be intentional. I'm not real successful at always that first one, and I'm less probably successful at the second, but I'm learning that I can't do the second. I can't be intentional without being fully there. That there's too much in life besides me, and believe it or not, parents are the biggest influence for kids. They look up to us as their heroes more than anybody. We would think that's not true, but even teenagers will do that. Lots of teenagers will act out for parents, for example, who are divorcing, because they're trying to get the attention on me. If I can get them to think about me, maybe they'll get along and at least combine and think alike on some project, and I can be the scapegoat. I can help rescue my family. They'll do amazing feats to help rescue their family. Couple of thoughts. 1 Corinthians 6 and 1 Corinthians 10. Paul gets these two statements out here. In 1 Corinthians 6:12, he goes, "All things may be legal, or it may be permitted to do it, but not all things are helpful." He says that twice. But in the middle of those, like the Oreo cream and the filling, he says this: all things might be legal, but I will not be mastered by anything. Teaching our children not to let anything control them. What do you think the number one addiction for a young person is? Technology. You got it. My little 3 granddaughters, they make their own phones out of Legos. I'm serious. They take Legos and they put stickers on them, and they walk around with these fake phones. They're 9, 8, and 6, y'all. They are busting at the seams to try to get a cell phone. Their mama's not going to let them have one until they're 35. That's what she says. Which is interesting because their mama, my daughter, was begging for one when she was, 16. So it's like, ooh, shoes on the other foot now. A lot harder for her though. I will not be controlled, and just because I can do it doesn't mean it's helpful for me. That's another conversation. That if we don't have it in these other areas, we're not going to have it in this area. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm not predicting, I'm just suggesting. If I'm stuck on my phone, I'm checking it every 5 minutes, and I'm going to talk to my kids about not being addicted to something, I'm sending a huge mixed message. Which message do you think is going to come across more heavily? What we do. They're going to see that. They're going to see it. It starts with me as a parent. Another verse that I always think about is Ecclesiastes 5, verses 10 to 12. Everybody talks about that book being such a dark book, but it's dark on purpose because it highlights the things that are the keys there. Let me see if I can read it, because I've got a little, the way I summarize it is more of more is insanity. So Ecclesiastes 5, verse 10, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. If you love getting more of anything, you're never going to be happy because you can never get enough of more. That's the addictive process. So here's what happens in addiction processes. It starts as a little kid. It starts with us as young ages as 4 or 5 years old. If you give a kid a tablet, it'll start wiring a brain like this if they're on it 24/7. Dopamine and the dopamine receptors are happiness kind of message carriers. And when you introduce some kind of substance or a behavior in there that messes with that, it usually dulls those. It either makes the amount of dopamine less and or it prevents it from being absorbed at the other message center, the receiver. And so what happens, you have to turn the speaker up to get more happiness. That's called tolerance in the addiction world. It happens with every type of thing. Just start a kid with 10 minutes of tablet time and see what happens to them. What are they going to do? I'm not saying you shouldn't have them on there. I'm just saying they'll want more. And if you just let them do games, they'll want to watch videos. If you want videos, they'll want to chat with their friends. It's never ending. Why? Because remember, we're built into this system that this is how we got our start in life. And somehow we have to turn that around and be reborn, have a new system where this part takes over, this perspective. See, in a new creation, a new creature, God goes, I'm not going to let you start down here anymore. I'm going to give you who I am. I'm going to tell you who I am. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery. I'm going to tell you who I am. I'm going to tell you who you are and everybody else is and how you're supposed to treat them. He gives us that very first. So the last thing we get in birth is the first thing we get in a new birth or a new recreation. And it also happens in recovery. That's what 12 steps do. They change your perspective. Works about half the time. And then that drives my thinking. So Romans 12 is you're transformed, you're changed by renewing your mind, and you offer your behavior as a sacrifice, your body as a sacrifice. So if those three balloons are what they're supposed to be, what will this be? It will be what's supposed to be. It has no choice, except these won't be feelings like love and happiness. They'll be fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, self-control. Those are not just what things you feel, they're things you are. They're things you do. They're things you feel. They're things you think. But it's how you see God, self, and others. You see yourself with love. That's our overall plan to inoculate our children against addiction, is to teach them the real meaning of being transformed, of not living the way you used to living. We do it with potty training. Right? We do it in school. I don't know as a society or even as a church we've adopted the culture of doing that when it comes to addictive type behaviors or substances, alcohol, drugs, work, entertainment, technology, anything. So why don't we start? Let's see here if I can couple. And I've got these specifics on your on that PowerPoint you get from Andrew there. So like if you're talking to 4 to 7 year olds, that's probably 4 years old is a good time to have intentional conversations. And number one, you got to make a space. You got to have a space for it. You can't do it while you're doing something else. Make it intentional. Take your kids somewhere that you know they would enjoy. Like for teenagers, go to Starbucks with them, hang out. Have a place where they know you have given them your full attention. So a 4 to 7 year old starts with a medicine bottle. Like my kids will say, Papa, what's that medicine you got up there? Take a little cholesterol medicine. Oh, this changes my body's way of processing cholesterol. I want them to know what that is and why I take it and why I need that. I don't want to go, that's just medicine. I hate doing that. If I start telling them things that they find out later that was either true or false or really false, it's going to ruin that relationship. It's going to make them go seek information from other sources. So just that honest conversation, how that, medicine is only used by one person. It's got my name on it, so it's only for me. When kids come home and ask you a question, Mommy, what's heroin? What do you tell them? It's a substance that people put in their bodies that can make them really, really sick and can kill them. It kills lots of people. They do it because they don't feel good, or they feel bad and they want to feel better. But it's kind of like, if you don't like eating your broccoli, would you want to drink something yucky instead to try to make that taste better? It's like, no. Well, if you don't like what you're feeling, you take heroin. It's like taking something bad makes it worse. It doesn't make it better. And Another thing to do is just talking about the simple dangers. They don't need to just hear it from the. Is there all the two bells? Just one. Okay. Okay.
We got a few more minutes.
Okay. I won't keep you too long then. If your kid, like if you're watching a movie, this is a great time, and they see smoking or drinking, maybe not just letting it go by, but talking about it. Say, what were they doing with that over there? This isn't cartoons even. It's a lot of drinking's in cartoons now. It's to talk about that. Because what's happening, it becomes commonplace. If it's in something they see and you don't say something about it, they just say, well, mom and dad must think that's okay. So again, you know how to do this. My mom would have said, if you see that right there, you ever do that, I'll break both your legs and shove you in the dryer and turn it on high. No, she wouldn't have said that. She would have looked at me and it would have said that. So I would have heard that. She would not have done that. Talking in terms that show that you're not afraid. They know when you're scared and you're trying to cover it up. So the only way to do that is you've got to not be scared. You got to have that conversation with your spouse, with yourself, and go, okay, when this time comes up, how am I going to handle this when they ask me these hard questions? Am I going to be okay with it? Recognizing that they're training me to wean themselves to do their own thing. So when they get to be 8 to 12, ask them what they think about drugs. You can do it in a casual, non-judgmental way. I'm just curious, what do you think about drugs? And don't judge them for what they say. You're in information gathering mode. If they don't want to talk about it, they're not interested, to say, hey, it's probably not a good time, but let's talk. We need to talk about this sometime when we get a little spot. How about we go somewhere, like their favorite place to have pizza or something? Or you go to camping, you go to the park, and you just don't make a big deal, but just make a deal out of it. So this is important to me. I want you to know that. It's important. Don't forget to pay attention to the concerns. No question is bad. If they have false information, you just kind of gently guide them back. The government has a lot of good information online about what the effects of are drugs, and encouraging them to say, this is what really works, There's some debate about whether you want to tell them if you did that when you were younger or not. I don't know. I haven't done that, so I don't know. But you probably don't want to say, when I was in college, I was high every day of the week or something. That's probably not the thing to tell your kid, because they can take it and go, run with it. Dad did it, mom did it, I'm okay. And you never really know how the child's going to take it. We don't have control over that. All we have control of is that, do we love our children? Are we looking out for the best interest? Are we being transparent and honest with them? That's the best we can do. Let's see here. 13 to 17-year-olds, now you can just know that they've got friends who are drinking. They're 13 to 17. They got friends who are already drinking beer, already smoking weed. I worked with a kid one time who was 16, and everybody thought he was depressed, and he was actually doing LSD, some serious stuff. So you watch for signs and changes of behavior, changes in friends, changes in grades, isolation, disconnection. That's one of the biggest signs. When they start pulling away from you, you know something's changing. Something's changing. And be willing to risk leaning into that.
As far as that conversation goes, once they get to that teenage stage, would it help out at all at earlier age for them to see somebody, for example, that somebody's already, deep in their addiction, and this is how they turned out? You don't want to be there, but in the teenage stage, they're seeing their friends do it, and they think, mom and dad said it was really bad, but my buddy, he's okay. I'm gonna try it.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. The worst thing for your kid to happen to them is not that they get caught. The best thing for them is they get caught. I know a kid who drank and drive. For 15 years, never. Cops pick him up, let him go every single time. He said he was picked up 20 times or so over his lifetime, and nobody ever charged him with anything. Worst thing that ever happened to that kid, because he became invincible. Still struggling with it now, today. So, if your kid gets in a little trouble, it's okay to let them suffer the consequences, detailing the punishment for it. But always being a supportive place to come talk about it. I will tell you this story, and I probably need to stop. But I'm glad to hang around and answer questions to anybody for real. I don't have to be home. I don't have curfew tonight too late. But we moved to Memphis, and Stephen, you know Stephen. Stephen's our little renegade child here. I don't know how he is. He's Stephen. He's a good kid. He believes in God. Doesn't want to get near a church building. But Mr. Goddard called me one day from the school and said, well, we've been randomly drug testing people, and Stephen got a positive test. No, Stephen tested negative. Stephen tested negative. And I said, really? Because I just knew he was smoking. I knew he was. I knew it. And he said, yeah. He said, I think the kids are buying this chives or something, and they're getting ripped off. So you might just want to know that. It's like, oh, I thank you for telling me that. Now, this is me before being a counselor, okay? So I came home, and Stephen was sweating bullets the whole night. And he ended up sitting on our bed. His mom was there, and they were looking like something bad was happening. I'm just glad I knew about it first, because I would have been worried. And I said, what's wrong? Stephen, what's wrong? You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. And it took him a while, but he said he got tested today, and I failed, because Mr. Goddard told him he failed. And I said, really? He said, I probably failed. I said, really? I said, so how long have you known this? He goes, since yesterday. And I just looked at him and I said, I just can't imagine what it feels like to have been carrying that news all the last 2 days, thinking you had to come tell me about it. Man, I'm sorry that you've had to do that for 2 whole days. I wish you could have told me yesterday. So we can talk about it after supper if you want to. I just walked out. Blew his mind. But now, had I not had that information ahead of time, I probably might not have had that conversation. Then he found out he actually passed his drug test, and he wanted to argue with me with it. No, the stuff we buy is really good. It's like, do you really want to be telling me that? Is that what you want to be telling me? That's right. So you're actually doing this. That was a hard relationship over many years. I've been through a lot of stuff with him. But Stephen, if he were here tonight, he would tell you this. He'd said, Dad, you didn't do anything wrong. You actually kept me from doing worse. You know, he had consequences, he had punishments, but I never took responsibility for his behavior. That's on him. It's on you. And so I think that part, he knows he can come talk to me about things. And as a parent, that's what I want long term. I want to know that they can come home when they come to their senses, like the prodigal son does. I want them to be able to come home and know my dad loves me. That's what's important. And that's hard to live out, because our reputation's at stake, right? And we're the ones who have to pay for a funeral if it goes wrong. Or we have to live with the shame. Well, maybe I should have done something else. If you can be free from that, I think your conversation with your children at whatever age will be much, much healthier. If you're okay and not afraid to start kind of passing some control, little pieces at a time until they have it all at whatever age they're ready for it, and you will know when that is. You will know when it is. There'll be less dissension when it happens. If you're always constantly fighting, it's probably you're trying to keep it too long, or they're trying to get it too early. That can happen. Okay, did we cover all the questions? I don't know if we got them all or not. I don't think I probably did. But remind me if we didn't. Thank you for listening. I could probably talk a lot about stuff, but I better stop, Andrew.
Thank you so much.
And feel free to reach out anytime, if you want to email or something, a question, or if you need information, I can send you some sources.
I can, here, I'll start a sign-up sheet. If you'll put an email address, I'll email those questions out, and then if you wanted to stick around, we'll probably have some people who want
I'll just hang out here a while.
Thank you for being here, but we'll be dismissed if you need to pick up kids, and I'll get this sign-up sheet.